This video is produced to fulfill the term requirements for the American Harp Society Chapter Ambassador Program. Learn more at harpsociety.org. So you've got a harp in your orchestra, and you've probably never worked with a harpist before because we're kind of rare. So there are some things you might want to know. Let's start with the basics. These are harps. You've probably seen one before, either in a concert or in transport. Maybe you've even heard a harp played before. But there are a lot of different kinds of harps out there, and working one with an orchestra setting is a whole barrel of monkeys. Records show that harps first became popular in the Middle East and India around 3500 BCE, and by the medieval age they had spread to Europe. There are also records of harps in ancient Africa and Greece. Back then, harps were pretty simple, not a ton of strings, no chromatics, and pretty much as basic as you can get. A string strung in a simple triangular wood frame. Harps then developed levers to control the chromatic pitch. In 1697, the first single-action pedal harp was made, using pedals manipulated by the feet to control the chromatics of the string instead of levers. Single-action pedal harps were made obsolete when the early design of the double-action pedal harp was patented in London in 1810 by the French Sebastian Erhard. The double-action pedal harp worked in the same way as a single-action pedal harp, but it gave the harpist the chromatic capabilities to play in the symphony orchestras of the time. If you have a harpist in your orchestra, they're most likely going to be playing a lever harp or a pedal harp. This is a lever harp. It uses levers manipulated by the left hand to change the chromatic pitch of the original note up by 1/2 step. Compared to pedal harps, they are quieter, smaller, have fewer strings and a lower string tension. Beginning harp students generally learn to play on lever harps. Lever harps are a C instrument, but they can be manually tuned to different keys. But this doesn't mean that they're capable of playing in all keys. Put a pin in this idea and we'll come back to it later. The music that lever harps read from looks like piano music, and this is a symbol that signifies lever change. In this case, the harpist would raise the lever on that particular F string. A lever harp has much more limited chromatic capability than a pedal harp, and therefore cannot play highly chromatic passages such as this one. This is a pedal harp. There are a few different sizes, but most professional or serious harpists end up playing a concert grand. Pedal harps have 47 strings, are a C instrument, and have 7 pedals, 4 moved with the right foot and 3 moved with the left foot, each pedal controlling all of that pitch on the harp. When a harpist moves a pedal, for example their C pedal from the flat position to the natural position, all of the C's on the harp are changed from C flat to C natural. There are 3 levels that the pedals can be at: flat, natural, and sharp. Pedal harps also read from a grand staff that looks like piano music, but the music usually also has pedal diagrams to show how our pedals need to be set for the chromatics of a particular passage. The actual pedal instructions are found between the 2 staves. Pedal markings are generally written with the Latin alphabet, although in French music they are spelled out in solfège. The biggest difference between a lever harp and a pedal harp is that a pedal harp can play in any key of any time, while a lever harp cannot, and that pedal harps have a much larger sound and chromatic capability than a lever harp. Each type of harp has the same pattern of colored strings. All red strings are Cs, all blue or black strings are Fs. A harpist will need to tune each string before they play, which can take a while, 5 to 10 minutes on average. All harpists, regardless of the type of harp they play, use 4 fingers on each hand, as pinkies aren't strong enough to get good tone quality. There are 2 major schools of modern harp technique, Grandjonet and Salzedo, which each have different specifics on how the harp is played, but in both techniques the harpist closes their hands completely for full articulation. Generally, the right hand plays in the higher register and the left hand plays in the lower registers. The harp rests on the right shoulder, and the music is set to the left of the harp and the bench. In an orchestra or symphony, the harps are traditionally placed behind the violins. However, I have played in ensembles where I have sat behind the violas next to the basses. In any case, the harp should be set in front of the winds and behind or to the side of the strings. It's highly advisable that a harpist playing in an orchestra is also taking private lessons, as harp technique is complicated and needs to be learnt correctly from the beginning, as otherwise harpists can risk injury. Another thing to keep in mind is that a harp is not a piano. Please stop right here and listen. A harp is not a piano. Think about it like this. Harps are plucky and pianos are percussive. You don't get the same timbre or the same volume out of them because they're so fundamentally different in how they produce sound. This means that a piano can be easily heard over a 100-piece symphony playing triple forte, which is not the case with a harp. This also means that harps are going to be used for different effects in orchestration. I get that it sounds so easy to hand this to your harpist, a piano score, and tell them to play it, but look here, this is going to be a problem. Repeating notes such as these is very difficult to do cleanly on a harp because our instrument doesn't dampen the sound between attacks. Watch this harpist playing a chord. All these strings are still vibrating even after they've been released, and on top of that, there's also resonance from other strings of the same wavelength that weren't played. Now watch the piano strings as the pianist plays the chord. As soon as she releases the keys, the sound is dampened by the hammer, and there isn't any resonance. Playing a harp would be equivalent to be playing the piano with the damper pedal consistently pressed down, plus some extra resonance. So if the piano part has quick repeated notes like this, maybe rethink having your harpist try to play it, as the sound can get pretty muddy. There are a few other red flags that pop up when I'm given piano music. 5-fingered chords, because they can't be played with only 4 fingers in each hand. Music that has a lot of accidentals on top of each other or in quick subsequent order. Impossible in lever harps and very difficult in pedal harps, as even feet need time to move. And passages in which the sound of the harp would be inappropriate. While most chords in piano music that are not made of 5 notes can be adapted for harp, it's worth noting that harpists play in a different hand position than pianists, and therefore comfortable spacing of the chords also differs. While piano music generally puts the melody in the 4th and 5th fingers of the right hand, the harp is played with the thumbs on top in both hands, and so the melody is usually taken with the 1st, 2nd, and sometimes 3rd fingers in the right hand. Generally, when looking at the adaptability of a piano score for a harpist, keep in mind that harps are good for arpeggios and glisses and long chords, and not lots of accidentals and quick repeated notes. Here are some common notations that you might encounter that are special or common in harp music. Glissandos, muffles, which stop the sound in one hand or both, and harmonic notation, often used by pedal harps and sometimes by lever harps to decrease the amount of pedaling or levers that need to be adjusted for the chromatics of a particular passage. Bracketing, which is used for fingering. Près de la table, or PDLT, in which the strings are plucked very close to the soundboard. And harmonics. A much more complete list can be found in the database directory at harpnotation.com, and there are video and audio examples of each technique listed above, and more as well. Because pedal harps have only been around for about 200 years, there's a lot less repertoire for harp and ensemble than there is for other instruments, such as a piano or even a solo violin. Sometimes piano music can be adapted as long as it's mostly harp appropriate and is rewritten or cut during troublesome spots. Sometimes parts can be created using violin and cello parts, although this is not ideal. Much repertoire to date written specifically with a harp part is for symphony orchestra and can't be played on a lever harp. Remember how earlier I said that lever harps can't play in all keys? This is a major problem in the type of music that a lever harp can play, because lever harps don't have the immediate access to all keys and the chromatic capabilities that a pedal harp does. Sometimes, if a part cannot be adapted for the type of harp, or the piece doesn't fit with the timbre a harp adds, the best option is to just not have the harp play, similar to in professional orchestras. We do bring books to rehearsal for a reason. But it's not all doom and gloom in terms of finding music for your ensemble. More and more grade school level pieces are being written with harp parts, and there's also resources for locating pieces for the instrumentation and grade level of your ensemble. I've linked some in the description below. Here's some advice and notes specifically for running rehearsal with a harp. Ensure that your harpist has adequate time, about 10 minutes, to tune before rehearsal. If the instrument is not already set up, this time may need to be longer to allow the harp to be unpacked. When in rehearsal, call out the starting places. For example, we're starting at box 3, and then wait a few minutes for us to reset our pedals. Harpists often have written in pedal diagrams at natural starting points, such as rehearsal marks, tempo changes, and key changes, but if the conductor isn't starting exactly on one of these, the harp will need a few minutes to work backwards through the pedal instructions to get the right pedals. If you don't allow time for this, the harp will be playing in the wrong key with the incorrect accidentals, and it will most likely sound awful. Connect with the harpist visually before starting so that you know that they're ready. If we have big passages, look at us before they start. Also, particularly for glissandos or fast arpeggios, conductors visually connecting with the harpist prior to those starting is particularly important so that the group lands together on the downbeat. Develop a relationship with the harpist so that they feel comfortable asking for a cue or eye contact in particular places they need it. Direct cueing will need to happen more often with a harp than with other sections. Oftentimes, the harp is playing for very particular points in a piece. These moments are isolated, and correctly keeping time, although possible, can be demanding and difficult for the new orchestral harpist. Please don't make the harpist sight read. I'm probably projecting a lot here because I hate sight reading in ensembles. I think that it's the hardest possible thing to do in an ensemble where everyone else can sight read almost up to tempo, even if their music isn't marked. When sight reading on a harp, one is trying to coordinate 2 staves, 2 hands, as well as read or make up the pedal instructions for 2 feet. Furthermore, pedals are generally put into muscle memory with practice, so they become much more automated. For these reasons, a harp sight reading is a lot harder than a violin sight reading. It's unreasonable to expect a harpist to sight read because we need time to prepare our parts with markings for our pedals, levers, cues, and fingerings. Unpedaled or unmarked music is sight readable only to a degree and only to some harpists. This is why professional orchestras don't expect nor require their harpist to sight read. It's also important to get the harp part or equivalent to your harpist as soon as possible, even if it's not yet the right concert cycle, in order for the harpist to work out these proper pedalings and fingerings. This takes time and is a very necessary step. Overall, the things that will need the most help from the conductor is the ensemble balance and the articulations achieving that. In more buried passages, it doesn't matter, but in more exposed bits, a dynamic balance will need to be adjusted so that the harp can cut through the orchestra's sound. Often the parts are orchestrated in a way and written in a register that helps with projecting the sound, but it's still something to be aware of. Most harpists start in solo work, and we only branch into orchestral work in high school and sometimes middle school if we can find an orchestra. For a harp, being in an ensemble is more about learning to play with other people than it is learning to play our instruments. This is different from the way that a lot of elementary string programs are run, in which students learn to play at the same time that they learn to be in a group. If it's a harpist's first time in an ensemble, they may need help finding the interior pulse of a tempo. This is a skill that's not often developed in solo playing, so it will be lacking in first-time players unless they've developed the skill on another instrument. Playing harp in an orchestra can be incredibly isolating as we don't have a section to rely on, so a strong connection between the harpist and the conductor is very important. Having a harp in the ensemble is so much fun, both for the harpist and for the other musicians. I hope this information has helped, and I hope that your first rehearsal goes well. This video is produced by Adaleigh Hellman, 2023 Chapter Ambassador from the Mile High Harp Society. Special thanks to Catherine Harms, Charles Lynch, Catherine Case, Barbara Lepke-Sims, Grace Bauson, Megan Sesma, John Thomas Dodson, Wesley Broadnax, Kalina Hellman, and the American Harp Society.